you see a lot of pushback because of the size. And I kind of want to address that for a moment. So we heard a lot of the same conversations before the OG Anunoby trade with Quickly and Brunson. Because a lot of people were like, correctly, Quickly is one of their best players. He should just start. And other people would say, well, it's too small. You can't put Quickly with Brunson. Number one, across 1.5 seasons, Quickly and Brunson played 1,240 minutes together, and they outscored opponents by over 9 points per 100 possessions. Okay, so I mean, already your argument is kind of flimsy there because they just crushed whoever they played. But number two, it actually was more reasonable, even though Quickly's better than Deuce McBride is. It's actually a more reasonable criticism of the Quickly Brunson backcourt than the Deuce Brunson backcourt because Quickly's optimal role as a defender is as an off-ball roamer. Anybody who's a Knicks fan, anybody who dove into the tape, especially in that 2023 season, understands just how good Quickly was defensively when he got to play off the ball. When he played that weak side low man in Thibodeau's defensive scheme, we're back. When he played that weak side low man in Thibodeau's defensive scheme, he was legitimately in the top percentile of most impactful defenders in the NBA. Like, he was incredible in that role. It was almost like they were playing 6-on-5 versus other teams because he was everywhere. But the problem with that is when Jalen Brunson's on the court, if you have one guard who can't guard at the point of attack because he's not very good, and then you have another guard who you don't want at the point of attack because his ideal role is off the ball, you're pretty handcuffed in terms of what the other three guys can do, who they can be. You don't have that problem with Deuce McBride. Deuce McBride's number one skill defensively is at the point of attack. He's a good screen navigator, but he's just very, very tough at the point of attack. You can even put him on some bigger, wings, but your flexibility increases with the Deuce Brunson backcourt relative to the Brunson Quickly backcourt, and that shows up in the numbers. Brunson and Deuce, when they play together these last two seasons, the Knicks are outscoring opponents by 15 points per 100 possessions. This is a totally viable backcourt pairing. I know Deuce doesn't do as much with the ball in his hands as you'd like, but like XJ just said, if Brunson's going to have the ball a lot anyways, then your guard has to be someone who's going to grab his defender, make sure his defender doesn't want to leave him. And that's one of Deuce's greatest skills offensively. That is his greatest skill offensively. He's an amazing shooter off the catch. He's an amazing spacer, a high value spacer off the ball. That's exactly who you could not dream. I know he's only 6'1", maybe, but you could not in a lab create like a more ideal profile for a basketball player to play next to Jalen Brunson than an elite point of attack defender who is also an elite spacer. That is what you want next to Jalen Brunson. So just because he's a little undersized, we need to dispel that notion.
Yeah, and obviously I totally agree with this. I think it's a great point about Deuce's point of attack defense skill set versus Quickly's and how Quickly is kind of not really optimally deployed next to Jalen Brunson, but the fact that Quickly and Brunson were so good over a ridiculous number of possessions, to me, that just goes to show how good Emmanuel Quickly is. Like, the guy is so good. It's just like, well, yeah, this is not ideal, but like, he's just so good that it just works. Like, we'll figure it out. But Deuce McBride that is not the case. And Deuce McBride, I think, I wouldn't necessarily call him an elite point of attack defender because I think he can struggle in like isolation in some situations, but he's obviously an elite screen navigator. And so when you have an offense where, most offenses aren't going to just like come down and ISO every time. They're going to try to run screens and create better mismatch advantages and open up their lead guard. And when you have a guy like Deuce McBride in that situation, that is the most ideal place you can be. So you can think of it as like, oh, there are better isolation one-on-one defenders than Deuce McBride, and who have more size and height and can contest and keep guys in front of them, maybe potentially a little bit better in certain situations, depending on the type of skill set the offensive player has. And that's true. But Can they do that and also get over every single screen that's thrown at them and be able to chase and contest from the side? And maybe Derek White. Who else can do that? Like Deuce McBride. There aren't many guys, and so like to your point, when you want a guy who's going to hound and harass the guy with the ball, to be able to have Jalen Brunson play somewhere else and sort of hide him on those wings and in the corners, there's no one better to have almost than, again, like aside from Derek White, than a Deuce McBride. And so, yeah, I obviously don't buy the idea that, for the size issue, it doesn't work or anything like that. I think at this point, we can be very, very confident that it works. The closest kind of resemblance of that lineup that you mentioned with Brunson is that they actually played with Deuce in the starters. It was Deuce in the starters, and then instead of Brunson, it was Campaign. I don't remember the exact data on that, but I know it was like ridiculously good in like whatever minimal amount of possessions it played, and that's what Campaign. So I think it'll be. I think we can be very, very confident for all of these reasons that this lineup would be great. And in my opinion, I think this would be one of the best lineups in the league if it plays enough. I think if it plays 200, 300 possessions, whatever that possession threshold might be, if it does get to 300, I think it'll be in the 95th, at least 90th percentile of lineups over 300 possessions if it makes it there. And I think it is just genuinely their most synergistic, consistent, high ceiling lineup that they have. And so, I generally agree. Also, I wanted to say shout out to you, Jeff, Jeff has written a piece on, on synergistic lineups that will be live very soon. And like I said, I think this is the Knicks' most synergistic. We'll see what Jeff thinks if you check out his piece. And guess what? It's going to be on hothandtheory.com, and it's going to be on the most synergistic lineup on every team. So a plug to check that out when you get a chance. But yeah, so generally, I definitely agree with you, Jeff, and I think that lineup needs to play a bunch, and I'm cautiously optimistic that it will. The biggest thing my concern was about Mike Brown was, and people might think this is small, was his treatment of Keon Ellis, which I think Keon Ellis is an extremely, extremely valuable and impactful player in a way of Deuce McBride is, and I honestly like Keon a little better than Deuce McBride, and I think he got marginalized in Sacramento. That continues to be the case as they bring in Russell Westbrook, which is
still happening.
It's like really sad. But
actually, the Knicks treat Deuce McBride about 1,000 times better than the Kings, who are like a way worse team than the Knicks treat Keon Ellis. It doesn't make any sense at all.
It makes no sense, but Mike Brown was a part of that problem. Mike Brown was a part of that issue, coaching the Kings, and so that was my biggest concern. It's like, is he going to end up in a situation, or is this a thing where it was just about Keon and something specifically with that situation, or is it about how he sees players like this in this ilk who have this sort of intangible impact, things that don't include, guys like that have very clear, direct offensive or defensive skill sets that are in your face, and we'll just have to see. But I'm hopeful that was more about something with Keon specifically, and that we won't see that treatment of Deuce McBride on the Knicks.
Yeah, and the point you made about what Deuce at the point of attack does for his teammates on the court, it's such a big part of it, and our understanding of this is so primitive relative to what it's going to be down the line. But if you can, if you're listening to this, if you can just imagine what some of his teammates' biggest weaknesses are defensively, whether that's Jalen Brunson, think about how much we talked about Towns isn't a center because he doesn't protect the rim. Well, guess what? The opponent's ability to get to the rim is less. It's more difficult if the guy at the point of attack is more preventative. So, yeah, Towns could be better at the rim, but also they could just have a guy at the point of attack who makes it less likely that the ball handler gets to the rim. And so these things are symbiotic in nature and how they affect one another. Like Mikal Bridges, his worst trait as a defender is his screen navigation. And the Knicks spent all of last season, a huge percentage of last season with these starting lineups, having Mikal Bridges be the guy funneling the ball handler into the paint, basically. That was how team opponents started their possessions. And so, of course, when your defensive scheme asks for the off-ball guys to stunt and recover, of course, when it's hugely reliant on elite rim protection, all of a sudden, guys like Brunson, guys like Towns, their flaws are more exposed because of the start of the action. And this is reflected in the metrics. Brunson had his worst defensive season by far last year. He was one of the most detrimental defenders in the NBA per the metrics last season. But that can be at least somewhat mitigated. And it starts with who is guarding the guy with the ball in his hands. And they have a defender on their team who can make it more difficult on that ball handler.
Yeah, playing into your players' particular weaknesses is probably not ideal. So if you're like, oh, we have this guy named Karl-Anthony Towns, he's pretty good at certain things defensively, but he's not a good rim protector. Let's make him have to protect the rim more frequently by putting guys who are getting beat around screens and allowing offensive ball handlers to get to the rim more frequently. Like that's probably not going to work out for the best for you.